4 days after I gave him one of my kidneys, he walked into my hospital room with another woman and a brown envelope of divorce papers, and dropped it on my chest like it was payment for a favor. The fluorescent light over the bed buzzes small and constant, the kind that makes everything look too honest. The woman's dress is the exact color of a warning, velvet red that eats the sterile white of the room. Beatrice is behind them in a wheelchair, cheeks drawn into that practiced disdain I could never soften. Julian's smile is an arrangement of teeth and ease, as if he hasn't been the one to edge me into the operating room. My hand finds the bandage at my side without thinking. The scar is a thin crescent, pale against dark skin, a small geography I carry now. I feel the outline of the envelope, stiff and cheap, like a promise folded wrong. For a few seconds, my brain is a useless machine. Then I remember anesthesia, the thing that makes you slip into a different clock, and the steady pressure of the surgeon's hand as he said, "This is what it will take." Julian's voice is too casual. "We talked about this," he says, like he is reminding someone of the weather. Sienna laughs. It is the loud sound of a woman who has never asked for anything and never been refused. She looks at me like she is admiring a finished room. Beatrice's eyes travel me like an inventory list. Not enough, not worthy. They are all cataloging what they can discard. I want to shout. I want to rip the envelope open and throw it back at them. Instead, my mouth forms. Why? Not the why of philosophy, the why of a thing you need answered now. Julian shifts his weight. It's cleaner this way. We have to be practical. For a second, I think I am watching a movie where a stranger is being cruel, and then I remember that I am the protagonist, and the script is lodged right where the scar is. 4 days ago, I signed papers and went under, because that was what marriage looked like in Julian's version of the story. Sacrifice, obedience, proof. 4 days ago, I gave him something that couldn't be clawed back with an envelope. 4 days ago, I trusted him. A nurse hovers at the doorway, eyes sliding over the tableau like it is almost routine. I want a witness who will say they saw the betrayal, that they saw the exact cruelty of dropping an envelope on a human chest like it's parchment for a deal. No one volunteers. Hospitals have schedules and pain pills and policies. They do not have outraged sense. "Take it outside," I say finally, voice thin as gauze. This is a hospital. Beatrice smiles in a way that belongs to someone who has always been entitled to other people's discomfort. "He needs to know where he stands," she says, and the words are a scalpel. A woman who gives up a kidney should not be asking for more than what's reasonable. Sienna leans forward and flicks her fingers at the envelope. "Consider it done," she says, voice warm with condescension. They move toward the door like a family walking through silk. When the door shuts, the room shrinks. The breath I thought I had is gone. I press 2 fingers into the bandage until it hurts, anchoring myself to the only thing physical that confirms this isn't a feverish dream. My chest aches, but it's less from the incision than from the idea of being treated like an expense. A blank thought surfaces and won't leave. I gave him a part of myself to prove I belonged. He repaid me by signing the divorce petition and showing up with someone else to make sure I knew I was replaceable. Stay with me till the end. This is how the wound became a lever. If you're moved by stories like this, you'll find links in the description to foster care and organ donation charities that helped me get through the early days. I go back, farther than the pain, because a wound only makes sense when you understand what it opened into. When I was small, the world smelled like oil and the burning of rubber. I learned how to translate sirens before I learned to tie my shoes. My parents had a way of turning joy into a practical thing. Fixing tires, patching a roof, measuring twice so nothing was wasted. They were not rich in money, but in that careful kind of love that paints expectations into neat squares. The night the highway took them, I remember a remote light blinking like a slow star and the smell of rain turning the asphalt into a mirror. I remember being lifted out of the wreckage by hands that shook, and a policeman who kept asking me my name like the answer might change who I was. After the funeral, after the house was catalogued into boxes, a social worker said, "We can find a place for the girl." Place. The word was sterile, an inventory again. Foster care meant unfamiliar beds and strangers who cared in limited amounts. I carried a small bag and a larger question. Where does one go when the map home is gone? Belonging became my skill. I learned to mirror people's habits and like what they liked. I learned to say yes in the right places. I had jobs that paid in small bills, and the kind of self-respect you build out of thrift store sweaters and late-night classes. Boutique work came first, dusting mannequins and folding silk with ritual respect. Then I met Julian. He was 2 racks over, leaning into a conversation with a buyer, charming like a man who had practiced being the center of things. His hair had that careful sweep. His suit whispered a future I'd never seen before. He made jokes that landed in the right spaces. He knew how to make a woman feel like the audience for a private performance. We moved fast. Maybe too fast, people told me later. But fast felt like rescue when you have only ever known the rattle of foster home doors. His mother, Beatrice, lived in a house with high ceilings and lower temperatures. She had a face that suggested displeasure was hereditary, and a way of sizing people that made me small. I thought if I could make the eldest woman smile once, that would mean permission to stay. Early marriage was efficiency, down payment on security, change of name, dinners where Beatrice offered criticism like seasoning. "You can do better," she'd say of my apron, my accent, as if belonging was contingent on constant correction. Julian brushed most of it off, telling me not to listen. Sometimes he would take my hand that looked like a woman in a rush to be loved, and I would believe he would make a place for me. Then Beatrice became sick. It started with small things. The breathlessness that made her step cautious, the way she stopped humming in the kitchen. Diagnosis is a strange kind of language. It names fear so you can talk about it. The word renal floated forward and clung to our conversations, the hospital rooms, the cups of coffee left cold on the counter. They explained incompatibilities and blood types and tests that looked like math. Julian's face would fold into a seriousness I had never had to practice. He pressed his fingers into mine like it was a compass. "I can't be a burden," he'd say, in those moments when he wanted me to act as if a banquet of responsibility was only a set of plates. He spoke about duty and about what family meant, about legacy like a chapter in a book he already had the rights to. When he suggested I consider becoming a donor, he did it like a man offering a sacred clasp of hands. His hand was hot when it closed over mine. "You'd have to be certain," he told me. "It's not a casual thing." Certainty is a luxury I didn't feel at the time. I felt hunger for a family that didn't change its mind about me, hunger to belong to a name that wasn't my own. I told myself that if Beatrice lived, she might soften. If she softened, maybe the kitchen would warm. The calculus was private and brutal. Give a kidney, gain a home. It sounds small when you say it like that, but in the small hours, it looked like survival. The clinic visits blurred. There were tests, and the nurses saying things that had a double meaning. We need a full consent. The forms were legal and thin with legalese, but one thing glinted in plain English, a clause most people don't look at until it's needed. It said that if the primary recipient became unfit, or the surgery couldn't proceed for medical reasons, protocol would dictate offering the organ to the next compatible recipient on the registry. I remember the clause because of how small the font was, how clinical. Julian tapped the page with a fingertip and said, "That's just paperwork. It won't matter." I signed because I had seen what it meant to be told you are not enough. I signed because Julian kissed the edge of my hand like it was an agreement sealed. I signed because Beatrice's eyes held a quiet, "We're deciding." I told myself that a signature was what belonging needed. Proof. On the morning of the surgery, the light was clinical but somehow softer. The pre-op nurse took my hand and asked me if I had any last questions. I did. I asked things that didn't have anything to do with arteries or blood pressure, like whether a dinner table could be resurrected, whether being useful could be the same as being loved. She smiled with a practiced sympathy and said, "We do what we can." The anesthesiologist explained in gentle terms. "Doctor." Bennett, steady, hands large the way someone who works with fragile things often has, placed his palm on my wrist and said, "We'll take care of you." I believed him. The surgery is a hole in the timeline for me. There are images like postcards, the low lamps of the recovery room, the muffled TV, the way the world felt distant, cotton-stuffed and soft. I woke to a tea-light sun, a nurse who checked my vitals, and Julian at the foot of the bed, hair messy from worry, eyes polished with relief. Beatrice had a hand tucked into a blanket. I wanted, purely and simply, approval. For a breath, I had it. For 4 days, I had the illusion of it. The 4th morning is when the clock runs backward and flips, and the thing I thought was my future becomes a memory like any other. I was groggy but awake, the scar along my side a tender map when I shifted. Julian left the room to take a call. Beatrice had gone home for a few hours. Sienna had not yet entered the picture. Life felt like it might resume gently. The world pulsed with hospital quiet, the rhythm of coffee machines and nurses' shoes. When I heard the door open, it wasn't his silhouette I expected. He came in with a composed gait, and sunlight pooled behind him in a way that made him look like a man in a news photograph. I don't remember exactly when he put the envelope down. I only remember the sound of paper against cotton and the way it felt like a physical weight on my sternum. "Honey," he said, the pet name landing like a facade that slipped. "We need to be apart." He had the assurance of a man who had already rehearsed exits. Sienna stood there in red, hands clasped behind her back, like someone who had not yet learned tact. Beatrice's wheelchair made a small squeal as she pivoted to see. The room filled with people who had already decided how this story would end. "You can't," I started. My words were small and brittle. I tried to imagine a world in which he had other reasons, in which he had not planned humiliation as a punctuation mark on the bedside. He crossed his arms. "This is healthier," he said, "for everyone." "Healthier?" I repeated. "Is this what health looks like? Dropping divorce papers on a woman who is stitched together from her choices?" He shrugged, as if shrugging would make it simple. Beatrice nodded the way a judge might once the verdict has been decided. Sienna's smile didn't reach her eyes. It was a predator's patience. The envelope was perfunctory and final. I called the nurse. I asked for the nurse to call security. I felt ridiculous and elemental. They told me I could press charges if I felt coerced, but they also reminded me of the signed forms. "Coercion is hard to prove," the nurse said in that clinical voice. "Legalities are cold water on a fresh wound." Julian left without a backward glance, Sienna's hand slipping into his like a checkmate. They turned the corner, and for a moment it was as if the room held its breath for them to be gone. The door clicked closed. I lay there, lungs like empty rooms, and tried to peel the moment from myself. Who had I been when I walked into the surgery? Who was I now? A knock. Dr. Bennett's face appears in the doorway, wearing that human steadiness I trusted from the pre-op. He closes the door behind him and comes to the foot of my bed with the careful gait of someone who knows the line between privacy and necessity. "Amani," he says, his voice low, "I need to tell you something about the transplant." I braced for the obvious things: complications, infections, follow-ups. Instead, he says, "The transplant for Beatrice was cancelled minutes before it began." For a long second, the words are a hollow that my body tries to fill. "Cancelled?" I ask. My voice sounds foreign in the room. "There were intraoperative developments," he explains, and the way he says it makes me understand without details that something about Beatrice, some risk, made the surgeons stop. According to hospital protocols, When the primary recipient becomes unfit, organs are offered to the next compatible recipient on the registry. The line collapses in my chest like a door slammed shut. So what happened to it? I ask, clinging to the last of my composure. He looks at me like he's holding a small, hot thing in his hands. It was offered to the next compatible patient, he says. A man named Harrison Sterling accepted. The name hits like a bright object dropped into my lap. Harrison Sterling. The papers I've glimpsed in society pages. The man with the emerald houses. The smile that suggested private jets. Someone whose image had been a kind of fantasy in the backdrop of places I never thought I'd cross. In the years since the accident that took my parents, I had learned celebrities the way other kids learned playground chants. Harrison Sterling was the kind of man who had the power of an unexpected second chance. Why him? I whisper. It's not a question about compatibility alone. It's the question about narrative. How does the organ that was meant for a mother of a man I loved end up saving a billionaire? Dr. Bennett's face is mapped with professional restraint. He was the next compatible name on the registry. That's how the system works. The organ allocation system is designed to be impartial. It doesn't care about wealth or social lists. It follows match and timing. But I don't know how to finish that sentence. The rawness of betrayal aches under it like an exposed wire. There's more, he says, and now his voice tightens. I wanted you to hear this from me. Julian brought Beatrice to the hospital for the evaluation. His presence was expected. Minutes before they took her into the OR, they found something, an active infection that made proceeding too risky. The surgical team made a decision to step back for safety reasons. I remember the afternoon before, the mild fever Beatrice had played down, the way Julian brushed it off on the phone. The timing, minutes before, reads like coincidence, like malice, like everything I am ready to accuse and still can't prove. Dr. Bennett pauses, measuring his next words. Given your consent and that clause in the paperwork, the organ couldn't simply be withheld. Protocol dictated the offering to the next match. That patient was Mr. Sterling. He received the transplant. 1,000 small narratives fan out from that pivot. He saved the life of the woman who had judged me into submission. He saved the life of a man whose wealth could purchase whatever it wanted. He paid me back with paper. Did anyone know, I ask finally, voice small, that the organ would go somewhere else? No, Dr. Bennett says. We follow procedures, and in a case like this, we inform donors and recipients through our channels. But given your recovery and the family circumstances, I thought you deserved a straightforward explanation. No sugar, no obfuscation. There is a rawness to his honesty that unsettles me, like clean water poured over a wound. Why are you telling me now? I ask. Because when I heard what Julian did, arriving with a petition and an attendant, something in me refused to be complicit in the humiliation, he says. I'm a surgeon, not a social worker, but I have to care for the people I operate on. You gave a part of yourself. You deserve the truth. He sits down in the chair by the bed. For a moment I stare at him, the man who pressed a palm to my wrist and said he'd take care of me. The scar at my side feels like a country I carry alone. Who is Harrison Sterling? I ask, and it's not a question of social media trivia. It's a question of fate. He is a public figure, Dr. Bennett says plainly. He also has resources and a team. When his people discovered this happened, they reached out. They were interested in getting in touch with you. The sentence is a hinge. It swings between the shame of that morning and an odd, unfamiliar glimmer of leverage. The story of my life up until this moment had been small rooms and borrowed towels. Here, unexpectedly, was the silhouette of someone who could make offers that rearranged rooms. Why would he, I begin, then stop. Why would a man who receives an organ contact the donor? Maybe he wanted to thank me. Maybe he wanted to be polite. Maybe he wanted to smooth PR. Maybe he wanted nothing more than a polite handshake and a mention in the right charity reports. Maybe he wanted to manipulate me the same way Julian had. The suspicion tastes old. I've learned to guard against any man offering me a place. Mr. Sterling's representatives have been discreet, Dr. Bennett continues. They asked for a meeting so they could understand what happened. There is something else. When they pulled Julian's filings as part of their due diligence, they uncovered financial documents showing certain assets registered in your name. The words unspool like a different kind of wound. Assets? The syllable seems foreign. I have been keeping count of bills and pantry staples my whole life. Assets are a different ledger. Property, accounts, things Julian registered legally under your name, Dr. Bennett says. From what I understand, Mr. Sterling's legal counsel believes those could be significant. That's why he asked us to let you know and to see if you'd be willing to meet with them. The room shifts. The envelope on my chest, the red dress in the doorway, the perfunctory cruelty of a man leaving a packet of paper on the chest of his molten-dyed spouse. These images slide into a different frame beside the new information. The same system that had let Julian stage his departure might have accidentally given me leverage he didn't expect. I feel both furious and incredulous. The outrage burns hot, immediate. How dare he weaponize my body? How dare he think divorce is a document that cancels decency? How dare he think he can file away me like a tax return? Why would they care, I ask. Why would someone with that much money care about me? Because, Dr. Bennett says slowly, sometimes people with resources do something unexpected. And because, legally, if assets are in your name, they can be yours. They were meticulous in their research, and they found a paper trail. He leaves me with the paper trail like a breadcrumb in the dark. The word meticulous tastes both comforting and dangerous. I have a lifetime of learning to believe what's offered, and to parse what is withheld. This feels like an opening. It also feels like a setup. The envelope still sits on my chest. The room is too small for all of this. The next hours are a drip feed of small things. A social worker offering me forms to sign so the hospital can release records. A nurse adjusting my morphine. A small, sterile tray with clear cups. The scar itches in a way that feels like memory. I think about my parents and the way my mother would brush her fingers over a cut to ease a child's worry. I think about the many times I told myself that someone would rescue me in a way that mattered. An hour after Dr. Bennett leaves, Julian's number appears on my phone. I do not answer. He leaves a message that is all civility and arrangement, concise, as if he is noting an errand. He says I should sign the papers and move on. His voice has no register for the deed he placed on my chest. Later that afternoon, there is a soft tap at the door, and a man I don't recognize walks in with a cane of privileges attached to him. The calm of someone used to being let into places. He introduces himself as Marcus Whitaker. His suit fits the way men in boards fit into rooms. It was tailored for budget lines and finality. Behind him, like bright punctuation, steps a woman in green. She smiles in a way that suggests money has taught her soft manners. I later learn she is part of Mr. Sterling's team. "Ms. Collier," Marcus says. He calls me by my full name, and that small formality is an acknowledgement. "I'm with Mr. Sterling. I hope I'm not intruding." "No," I say. "I'm just trying to process." Marcus nods as if processing has a schedule. He sets a leather folder on the bed and opens it with the kind of precision one uses to unveil a painting. Inside are photocopies, a deed, a list of holdings, a bank illustration with lines and decimals that mean nothing to me and everything at once. My name is on some of them, typed in black official ink. For a second, the letters on the page look like a dream translation. My name written on property lines I had never walked. My name associated with accounts that could hold more than a month's groceries. It's dizzying and suspicious. "These were registered by Mr. Vane," Marcus says quietly. "I don't know the intention. Sometimes people put assets in the name of a spouse for convenience, sometimes for manipulation. The legal team thinks there's a path for you to claim them if you choose not to contest the divorce. Why would I not contest it? I ask. The answer sits heavy. To be free of him, to keep what is mine, to be safe from an ongoing legal fight that will burn through months and leave me scoured. But the instinct to fight is as ancient as my foster care training. I have a calendar of small slights that could be used as motive. Everything they did seems like a reason to fight all the way to the courthouse. We can offer counsel, Marcus says. Discreetly. Mr. Sterling wanted us to make first contact personally because he believes you were treated unjustly. He would like to help if you'd accept. The phrase, he would like to help, lands like an invitation. I have learned to be wary of invitations from the wealthy. Most invitations come with expectations, unseen costs. Julian's envelope was an example. I open my mouth to decline just to keep my dignity. But I also look at the thin crescent of a scar on my side and think how many times in my life I've chosen to say yes because I feared losing more. Do you want anything from me? I ask, and the question is not empty. I want to know whether this is gratitude, PR, or a trap. No, Marcus says. We want to offer you options. Whatever you decide, it is yours. Mr. Sterling is particular about discretion. He knows this is messy. Messy is a good word for it. I fold the paper back into the folder like I'm tucking a frail animal into a blanket. The sunlight through the blinds draws bars across the sheets. For a second, I imagine paying for my parents' grave, fixing the porch of the house I grew up in, replacing the curtains in the foster home that smelled like bleach and old coffee. These are small acts of repair that have always been out of reach. But then, I remember Julian's face as he left, the way he and Sienna moved as if a transaction had been completed. I recall Beatrice's coldness, the bitter place she had in her mouth for everyone who wasn't born her kind. I recall my mother's hands steadying a pan. The contrast is sharp. Give me time, I say finally. I'm recovering. Of course. Marcus closes the folder carefully. When you're ready, Mr. Sterling would like to speak with you in person. He prefers to meet at a neutral location with his counsel present. There is a photograph of Mr. Sterling tucked in the back of the folder, glossy and corporate. An older man with an easy jaw, and eyes that have the specialty of people who know how to get what they want. In the photo, he's wearing an emerald tie that catches the light. It looks ridiculous to be considering it in the sterile hospital room, but the color sits like a promise of a different future. When Marcus leaves, the door shuts with the kind of soft click that marks the closing of a chapter. I am left with the envelope on my chest and a small, folded territory of possibilities. Stay and litigate with Julian for months, or accept counsel and the shadow of a man whose life is calculated in boardrooms. That night, sleep is thin and full of shards. I dream of counting dishes at a table that isn't mine, of scrubbing a floor someone else has stained, of being applauded for handing over parts of myself in the name of love. When morning comes, the scar itches again like a memory tapping to be told a story. 2 days after the meeting with Marcus, a photo appears in an email that Dr. Bennett forwards, a shot of Harrison Sterling in the hospital, looking tired but alive. Beneath it is a note from a legal assistant. We would still like to speak if you are comfortable. Comfortable is not the right word for any of this, but these are offers that might make a different kind of life possible. I think of the ways money had always been a distant siren. Unimaginable houses, irreproachable wardrobes. More than that, I think of the leverage it brings. Lawyers who know the language of contracts, accountants who can read through numbers like weather. Those are tools for someone who has been a small thing for too long. By the end of the week, there are more files on my bedside table, discreet envelopes with stamps of law firms, and an invitation to meet in a conference room with glass walls and leather chairs. I find myself wondering when the line between help and manipulation becomes blurred. I have been manipulated before. I don't want to mistake a lifeline for another leash. When Dr. Bennett visits, he puts his hand on mine and says, "You did not waste your gift, Amani. People will use it to tell different stories. What's important is the story you choose to tell next. Choosing a story is harder than living one. I had once accepted a narrative that made me small because it promised shelter at the price of my own anatomy. The envelope had been a punctuation I didn't deserve, but perhaps it was also a hinge. As the hospital days stretch into a week, I take inventory. The scar on my side is tender, but it's healing. My muscles are slow to remember. I watch my reflection in the window and trace the crescent with my eyes like a new language. I find a strength I didn't know I had, a patience edged with heat. Anger doesn't always need to scream. It can be cold and attentive, like a watchman keeping time. One afternoon, Marcus knocks, and this time brings Thomas Reed with him. Thomas is the kind of man who organizes storms into memos and lawsuits. He carries a folder marked in a way that says he has already planned for more than one eventuality. He does not smile much. "We wanted to be sure you had representation," Thomas says. "Legal counsel is the first thing you should have in a case like this." "Why would you help me?" I ask again. "It is not a question of charity. It is a question of motive." Thomas folds his hands. "Mr. Sterling believes in stewardship. He believes that when someone receives an unexpected second chance, sometimes they should use it to correct injustices. He also believes you were treated unfairly. He asked us to offer whatever counsel we can provide." There it is. Stewardship. Another word for responsibility. The language smells of polished wood and strategic intent. I feel a small, complicated gratitude that twists with a new wariness. I am not naive about what comes with such offers. There will be demands, contracts, and the inevitable small print. But something else clicks into place. For the first time in a long while, I have options that do not require me to grovel at a mother's feet or offer pieces of myself as proof. "I'm not promising anything," I tell them. "I need to think. I need to know how this benefits me, not just how it benefits a man with a lot of power." "That's fair," Thomas says. "We can arrange a list of priorities. First steps: secure your immediate financial needs, catalog the assets, and, if you're willing, have us look into the circumstances around the consent forms." His careful word, circumstances, feels like a respectful nod to a messy truth I am not yet prepared to air in public. I want retribution like a pounding fist, but I also know justice is a long, surgical process. The difference between revenge and justice is a kind of measurement. That night, I look at my hands. They have grown softer with rest, but the map of lines is the same. I think of my mother's palms and the counter where she used to knead dough. I think of houses with light that felt permanent. I think of the bank account numbers in the folder and the strange possibility that a man who hurt me might have signed away the wrong part of me. As the first week closes, I realize the story has shifted from the moment of betrayal to something else. The envelope was a wound and a revelation, both. Wound because of the humiliation, revelation because it uncovered an absurdity. Assets in my name filed by a man who thought he was erasing me. When Sienna calls the hospital the next morning to ask about Beatrice's condition, with the thin concern of someone who is always acting, I refuse to pick up. I want to save the last of my dignity for myself. The newspapers do not know of this little domestic ruin. They don't yet know my name or the scar. They won't until I want them to. But the world is small in a way I hadn't thought before. Small because my body could be a currency in someone's narrative. Large because that same currency could unexpectedly consult with the ledger of a man whose life has clout. The two axes, humiliation and leverage, meet under the bandage. The air in the hospital seems charged now. Each person who knocks on the door brings a possibility. Each envelope could be an end or a beginning. I have to decide how to spend the resources fate dropped on me. Cling to the righteous fury that will eat me, or learn how to make anger into a tool that opens doors, not destroys them. When Dr. Bennett tells me, quietly, that people will be respectful of my recovery, but careful to assert that any legal moves will be up to me, I find I am no longer only the person who seeks belonging. There is a small thing that has hardened, an ability to read a room and an intention to learn the languages of law and ledgers so I won't be outmaneuvered again. The hospital room is quiet. Outside the window, the day is the color of cheap light, like a coin being turned over to see where the shine is worn. The envelope remains on the nightstand. The scar itches when I breathe, and I rub it with the pad of my thumb until it calms. I do not know whether Mr. Sterling's offer is salvation or a new set of bindings. I do not know whether I will accept counsel and step into a world that runs on different rules. What I do know is this: I will not be left on a bed like a footnote. I will not allow the story of my body to be written without my say-so. The choice feels heavy and right. When Marcus returns with a business card and an invitation for coffee with a member of Mr. Sterling's team, I take it. Not because I am grateful, but because I am not finished yet. Moments like that feel like the hinge between what happens to you and what you decide to make happen. The hand that once wrote my consent will be countered by a pen that could write a different ledger. I do not yet know what Phoenix will look like, if that's even the right name for what comes next, but I can feel the ember of something being fanned. When the sun sets a thin strip of red through the blinds, I unwrap the hospital blanket and stand. The scar tingles like a small protest. I dress slowly, with a slowness that is a kind of reclaiming, like returning a borrowed coat and keeping the receipt. I run my thumb along the bandage and I speak the name of the woman I want to be. Not naive, not small. A person who will take what she has been given and forge it into a shape that protects others. The morning after, there is a conference room with glass walls and leather chairs waiting for me, and a calendar with more meetings than I have days to count. I move like a woman who has learned to get dressed for storms, slow, deliberate, each piece chosen with intention. The scar along my side is a private geography that sits beneath silk and memory. I trace it once in the elevator mirror and set my face like a flag. Harrison Sterling meets me in a neutral suite downtown, the kind of place that smells faintly of old money and new capital. He is quieter in person than his photos suggest, less emerald tie flash, more the steady reserve of someone who is used to having plans land on his desk and become real. He thanks me simply, without ceremony. Gratitude can be a dangerous thing, but his is straightforward, as if he understands that the gift I gave was not a ticket to adoration. I wanted to make sure you had options, he says. Not sympathy. Options. He is precise about what he offers: discretion, counsel, and a team that can read ledgers the way surgeons read charts. Thomas Reed, his lawyer, explains the thing I have been trying not to let myself hope for. The assets registered in my name are real, and because they are in my name, they require different legal treatment than if they were merely his. Marcus outlines the practicalities: secure my immediate finances, hire counsel to examine the filings, and, if appropriate, move to assert ownership rather than burn months fighting an acrimonious divorce. I ask a question I have rehearsed and never wanted to ask aloud. Why help me? Harrison's eyes tilt toward the window, and for a moment I see a man who has learned to hold both power and modesty in his hands. Because stewardship isn't just about what I own, it's about what I do with second chances. You were part of something that changed the course of someone's life. That matters. The words land like a glove, fitting a hand long unused. I don't accept gifts easily. I have lessons braided into my ribcage about self-reliance and suspicion, but I take their help because it is not charity. It is leverage dressed as counsel. They teach me the vocabulary: escrow, due diligence, fiduciary duty. Each term is a tool I haven't had before. I listen, take notes, literal ink on legal pads, because that is how people who make deals remember what they intend to do. Training begins in a way that would have felt ridiculous to my younger self. Early mornings with Thomas and Harrison's team, walking me through balance sheets and boardroom etiquette, mock depositions, so my voice sounds deliberate under pressure. Marcus sits opposite me with a tablet and plays me recordings of Julian's business calls, red flags hidden in casual language, transactions that don't line up with inventory, invoices that look like receipts for facade. Each session sharpens me. Anger is still the fuel, but skill is the engine. "You won't get justice by yelling," Thomas says once with a lawyer's frankness. "You get justice by building a case they can't ignore." I learned to read the world in new fonts: compliance reports, bank reconciliations, and audits. The vocabulary of power is slow at first: accounts receivable, covenant defaults. But the more I study, the less those numbers look like secrets. They look like a map of where Julian had been careless, and more importantly, where he had been criminal. My history with him becomes an asset in itself. The patterns of his behavior, the way he covered things with charm, the network of vendors who accepted his bribes of convenience. Each detail is a thread. We do not take shortcuts. Marcus and Thomas stress that any action we take must be legally sound. They subpoena records, they use forensic accountants, they build an evidentiary trail. It is tedious and meticulous, and the kind of work that would have bored my younger self to tears. Instead, it makes me feel dangerous in a disciplined way. There is a joy to seeing a spreadsheet line up like a neat stack of plates. Months move like a choreography. While I am recovering, the hospital becomes the small town of my immediate life. Visits from nurses who have started to respect me for my quiet patience, phone calls from Harrison's counsel, and a steady trickle of paperwork that reads like a new alphabet. Beatrice's condition worsens in a way that is inexorable. Her death is a slow, clinical slide, and when it happens, it lands us all in a different kind of grief. There is no satisfaction in it for me. There is only a stark, hollow finality that removes possibility for reconciliation and replaces it with cold fact. The funeral is scheduled, and the city seems to hold its breath. In private moments, I still reach for belonging as a reflex. It has been my reflex since the foster home. Mirror other people, say the acceptables, bend into shapes where I won't break. But my reflexes have been retrained. I bend now toward consequence, toward systems that make abusers answer. I learn how to steer conversations without emotionless cruelty, control as strategy, not vengeance. Phoenix Investments is a name that arrives one late night over a muted conference call. It is a vessel, a legal entity created not to ambush, but to exert pressure where Julian's company is already fragile. The plan is not to ruin him for the sake of ruin. It is to use legitimate financial instruments and claims that force transparency. Phoenix is designed to bid for distressed equity, to partner with creditors and, most importantly, to commission independent audits that will expose any discrepancies. The team is careful. Our moves are public, lawful, and backed up with evidence. I take the title reluctantly at first. CEO sounds like an actor's role. But the more I learn, the more I am pleased to find the title fits. I practice speeches in front of a mirror. Harrison insists on coaching me for interviews, not to make me polished, but to make me unflappable. Speak with fact, he tells me. Let the numbers do the indignation. We position Phoenix as a charity-minded investment house that targets failing businesses with the aim of restructuring for the benefit of workers and creditors. It's a narrative I am comfortable with, restorative rather than predatory, and it buys us moral ground when we make our first formal overture to Julian's textile company, Vane Fabrics. Vane Fabrics is not failing because of market forces alone. It is failing because of misstatements, diverted funds, and shell vendors Julian created to move money. Our audits, independent and scathing, reveal a pattern of bank transfers that look like payroll but trace back to accounts controlled by Julian and his accomplices. Thomas arranges for the findings to be delivered to major creditors, who in turn call in loans and force a restructuring. We never take assets by trickery. We simply buy into a process that, when illuminated, leads to predictable consequences for someone who had been concealing liabilities. As Phoenix gains legal standing, the press begins to notice the woman who is quietly demanding audits. I show up to shareholder meetings as a calm storm in an emerald skirt that becomes a motif. Green for revival, for money that rebuilds. The same red dress that had eaten the hospital's white in my memory is now replaced by something that announces intent rather than Mark's injury. The gala is the kind of affair Julian's circle loves. Crystal chandeliers, a ribbon of laughter, people who move like well-placed details in a photograph. I arrive with Harrison at my arm, but I do not let his presence swallow me. My dress is an emerald that catches the light, and as I step into the room, I feel the old smallness peel away like an ill-fitting coat. Julian notices me like a man who has been interrupted mid-scheme. He approaches with the easy smile of someone who assumes the room still bends to his will. Beside him, Sienna glows in red, a familiar flash that used to mean humiliation to me. The room shifts, whispers unspool like silk. I am introduced as Phoenix's CEO. The applause is polite and a little surprised. My name saying out loud in that space feels like a reclaiming, typed, spoken, public. Reporters hover with the voraciousness of timekeepers. I give a short statement about stewardship and transparency, and then I step back. We had prepared for this. The audit reports are public now, uploaded to corporate registries and distributed to creditors and regulatory bodies. The numbers speak. I make no furious speech. I deliver facts and offer a path forward for Vein Fabrics workers. That is the exquisite quiet of triumph, victory by discipline, not shouting. Julian blanches as bank officers call him away. He tries to smarm his way through the night, but his smile doesn't hold. That night, the phones ring off the hook. Federal investigators contact Thomas Reed with questions. The word indictment is still in the future, but the direction is set. The hearings move with a momentum that is both exhilarating and terrifying. I am not immune to fear. I sleep with the lights on for several weeks, but fear tastes different now. Fear is fuel for preparation. Beatrice's funeral is announced with the ceremoniousness expected for someone of her class. The church is warm, the air heavy with candle wax and eucalyptus. Julian arrives with a lineup of operatic grief, and Sienna at his side like a scarlet marginalia. The congregation murmurs with the ritual of condolences. I am there because funerals are not private. They are thin social audits where the living reconcile layers of performative decency. They do not expect what comes next. In the corridor outside the church office, federal agents wait with warrants and case jackets. They approach Julian with professional courtesy and the iron certainty of men who have been shown a path of wrongdoing and are prepared to walk it. The arrest is quick, respectful, and efficient. I watch him straighten his tie for a moment as if this is another performance, and then an agent places a hand on his shoulder. He looks at me with a kind of disbelief that has become familiar. For an instant there is a tableau so sharp it feels cinematic. Julian in cuffs, Sienna pale and clutching a program, the priest frozen mid-gesture. The murmurs swell into a tangible sound like rolling thunder. They read him his rights. There is no dramatic shouting. There is only the inevitable collapse of a man who lived by concealment. An assistant whispers that charges include bank and wire fraud. Thomas nods, his jaw working in a way I cannot read. The agents lead Julian away. People stand and watch as if looking at a public falling star. Sienna bolts. She runs past the pews toward the parking lot, her red dress a bloodline across the somber marble. Panic is a poor navigator. She trips at the church steps, the program scattering like white confetti. Marcus, who has been quietly documenting the process, intercepts her. Security holds her until the agents question her. The image of Sienna on the ground with grass damp on her knees becomes a picture newspapers will not print with relish, but investigators will keep for procedure. Inside the funeral chapel, I finish the words I had planned for Beatrice. a measured, honest remembrance. I speak not to mock, but to mark the truth that humans are complicated, and that loss is loss, even when the lost person has been unkind. My honesty is not a scalpel. It is a light. Later, in a small hospital room where Beatrice has been moved in her final hours, I stand beside a bed I once imagined would be the one I had saved for. The heart monitor's ticks are both mechanical and sacred. She looks at me with a face that in its last moments has no room left for disdain. I tell her, softly, the truth that I learned the hard way. Humiliation is not currency in the ledger of worth. She whispers, a paper-thin sound. You thought you were small. Sometimes, I admit, sometimes people make you believe you're small. Her eyelids flutter like curtains. Machines keep time. Thomas stands nearby with a record of audits and subpoenas, the legal scaffolding we'd built that now moves with its own momentum. The room holds the thick scent of antiseptic and something older, regret. In her last breath, there is a small confession. I had not expected it, and part of me recoils. Part of me has been waiting for it. He thought he could buy, she says, not finishing, but the implication is enough. The monitor's tone flattens. There is a finality that is not sweet. It is honest and terrible and human. I do not crow in victory. There is no pleasure in the extinguishing of a life. What replaces the old dynamic is cold clarity, not glee. I step out of the room holding that clarity like a small shield, because dignity requires it. The officers process evidence and collect statements. The funeral becomes a secondary stage for investigations. Whispers metamorphose into subpoenas. Weeks pass. Courtrooms hum with the procedural heartbeat of indictments and discovery. Julian pleads and equivocates. Sienna's role is scrutinized. Trey, someone with loose ties to Sienna, turns up in documents as an accomplice in the diversions of funds. His name is a comma in long emails that read like financial weather. The legal system works with its own machinery and pace. It is not instant. That slowness is its virtue and its cruelty. We do not gloat in public. Phoenix releases statements about worker protections and responsible stewardship. We set up a fund to ensure displaced employees of Vein Fabrics are paid severance and offered job retraining. The press eats the story with an appetite for moral arcs. Poor girl donates kidney. Rich husband betrays. Rich benefactor helps. Justice follows. It's a tidy narrative that flattens the mess of grief and moral ambiguity into paragraphs for weekend reads. I accept my part in the story but refuse to let it be simplified. The trial is a long, meticulous reveal of documents. I testify, careful, measured, steady. Thomas prepares me like a violinist for a performance. Practice is the scaffold of courage. I speak of consent, of the clause in the paperwork, of the humiliation of that brown envelope. I speak without the flame of accusation, because anger is not persuasive in a courtroom. Facts are. The prosecutor uses our audits and bank records to show that Julian's company moved money in ways that matched patterns of fraud. The defense tries to muddy the waters. The truth, though, has a cumulative weight. The verdict is not a cinematic collapse. It is a sober reading of a transcript. Guilty on certain counts. Sentencing follows on its own timetable. There is a justice to it that feels like cool water on a fever. It does not erase the theft of trust or the hours of recovery, but it names wrongdoing and holds it accountable. In the months that follow, life settles into a new architecture. Phoenix Investments transitions from a single-issue crusade into a real mission. We invest with an ethic, buy distressed assets only where transparency will protect workers and creditors, push for accountability, and turn failing companies into healing projects rather than extraction schemes. People call me a philanthropist and an investor, and sometimes a symbol. I prefer the last title because it suggests transformation rather than charity. I use some of the funds, carefully and with oversight, to set up a legal aid grant for people coerced into medical decisions by intimates. There is a small, fierce satisfaction in giving others the same kind of counsel that kept me from being steamrolled. I endow a fund at my old foster care home so kids can learn trades and attend classes without worrying about rent. Restoring my parents' graves is a quiet, private act. New stones, fresh flowers, a bench where I can sit when the weight of the world becomes too much. There are practical restorations too. I hire a local architect and repaint the porch of the house where my childhood household once stood, the place where I learned to translate sirens into survival. It feels less like buying peace and more like closing a circle. The scar along my side remains, pale, a small crescent, but it no longer imports shame. It reads like a memoir in miniature, visible when I choose, like punctuation in a sentence that refuses to be erased. Dr. Bennett stays in the periphery, a steady presence across the months. He visits the Phoenix offices under the pretext of hospital outreach and stays for coffee. Our conversations stretch beyond medical follow-ups into slow discoveries, favorite books, an atrocious first job, the taste of coffee in the mornings. He is careful, not theatrical. One evening he walks me to my car after a late meeting and asks a question that is more invitation than demand. "Would you like to have dinner? No agendas, just dinner," he says, like a man who has learned the decorum of small offers. I want to test the new woman I have become, to see whether she will accept warmth without surrendering the watchfulness that kept her safe. "Yes," I say, "but you have to accept that I will check the steak for overcooking." He smiles, that same steady ease that calmed me in pre-op. "Deal," he says. Romance is not the tidy bow some would expect. It is slow and tender and respectful, like good suturing after a rough tear. We speak of small things at first, the rhythm of calluses on our hands, the music we both pretend not to like. He is a friend who listens with the patience of someone who has seen trauma and knows that time is the one honest healer. I do not find an easy capital J justice in the end. There are fines and sentences, and some of Julian's made assets are used to make his victims whole. There is no soothing before and after montage that eliminates the pain of betrayal. But there is a recalibration. I am not defined by the envelope or the red dress or the wound that made a crescent across my skin. Those are parts of me, not the sum. People sometimes ask whether I regret giving my kidney. The question always lands as if the gift was a misstep. Regret implies misplaced value, a currency wasted. I answer steadily now. I do not regret the gift itself. I regret the way it was weaponized. But every scar is part of the map that got me to here. On quiet mornings, I sit on the porch of my little house, no longer a house of borrowed refuge, but a place with a key in my hand, and watch the Georgia hills open like a promise. The sunrise is honest and slow. Light spills over green and gold, and the breath I take tastes like restoration rather than anticipation. I have learned to steward not only money, but mercy. Phoenix's grants fund clinics for people who need second chances. Our legal aid projects help those coerced into medical decisions find counsel. We hire from communities that were once sources of cheap labor and lift skills rather than exploit them. People who knew me before the envelope sometimes ask how I did it, how a woman who once learned survival in thrift store sweaters and foster home rooms ended up running an investment vehicle, testifying in court, and funding legal aid. I tell them the truth, with help, perseverance, and a stubborn refusal to let humiliation be the last word. I say that anger can be a teacher, but skill is the teacher's handbook. The scar remains as a small, private ledger of what I gave and what I gained in return. Knowledge, not vengeance. Stewardship, not spectacle. It is a reminder that my body and my choices are mine, not the subject of brown envelopes or social theater. Once, in a haste of old habits, a magazine ran a headline about me that read like a fairy tale, from donor to CEO. People liked the simplicity. It was a neat package. The truth isn't tidy. It is messy and requires patience. It is not a transformation that absolves pain, but one that teaches how to walk with it. One evening after a long board meeting, Thomas hands me a letter from a legal aid clinic, a request for funding to help a young woman who had been coerced into medical compliance by her partner. I sign the check without ceremony, fold the page into an envelope, and think of my own hospital bed. My chest tightens, but not in the way it once did. There is tenderness now where there was only rawness, and that tenderness is an instrument I practice like a new language. Dr. Bennett and I sometimes walk near the river, where the city hum is a distant thing. He never presumes to fix what was broken. He simply walks beside me, steady. We talk about small things and big ones. He shows me, in quiet ways, how trust can be rebuilt slowly, not declared in a single pronouncement. There is room between us for curiosity and care. At night I sometimes wake and feel the edge of memory scratching, an old reflex for belonging. I lay my hand over the scar and feel the healed tissue like a compass. The city outside is a distant breath. In the distance, the hills are not mountains. They are patient, weekly hills that know how to wait for the sun. If you have made it this far with me, thank you for staying. If this story leaves you thinking of someone who needs help, there are links in the description to foster care organizations and charities for medical consent advocacy. And if you want to hear more stories of people who turned pain into purpose, subscribe for more testimonies like mine. The envelope that once marked me as disposable is now one of the reasons I help others keep their dignity. The scar is a map, the emerald dress a memory of reclamation, and the sunrise over Georgia feels like a promise, not of erasure, but of new mornings I get to choose.